Hey guys, we'll go ahead and call this one Evolution Part 2. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the next few minutes to kind of discuss the questions that you had that are based on Evolution Part 1. I'm going to address questions that existed about this word pressure and how pressure can be applied to a population. And so let's start by talking about some of the things that can cause a pressure on a population. One of the things that can cause a pressure on a population are environmental conditions. By environmental conditions, I basically mean weather or climate change. These are things such as drought, temperature changes like extreme temperature. We could be talking about excess rain or flood. We could be talking about some sort of natural disaster. We could be talking about a fire. We could be talking about an increase in predator population. But no matter what we are talking about, the one thing that's for sure is this change that happens, or this pressure that's being applied to an environment, is going to have some profound impacts on that population. It's probably going to cause a dramatic decrease in the number of individuals that are available in that particular species. And it's going to apply this huge amount of I'm going to use that word again, pressure, but what happens is that the individuals are forced to adapt. And if they do not adapt, I mean, the ultimate consequence for a species is that it leads to extinction. And you think about it, this adaptation that has to happen, it's being forced and being applied to the whole population. And the greater the pressures that exist, the faster this process is going to happen. And in my previous video, I talked about reproductive rate and the importance of reproductive rate, and how humans have a really slow reproductive rate. And I had people saying, well, aren't humans exempt from this natural selection because of our great technology and the fact that we can create medicines and technology to go ahead and alleviate any of these problems that we have? No. We're not exempt from any of this. There are parts of the natural world that we've been able to head off. There are certain diseases that we've been able to find cures for or create vaccinations for. There are problems that we have solved, but there are problems that we have not solved. There are many problems that we have not solved, and there are many things that are having a profound impact on our population. But Mr. Omni, the population of humans is growing tremendously, and it's an exponential growth. It's not an exponential growth. We're going to flatline very, very soon. The exponential growth that is being talked about is not happening everywhere in the world. It's isolated to certain populations. We are very successful at living to reproductive rate or reproductive age, which is causing an exponential growth of the human population. But the bottom line is that we are still affected and impacted by the natural world, and there are many things that are out of our control. And so, while we might experience less pressure as a population than other species do, I mean, let's be real. The human population is applying pressure to many other species, and is why we have a huge increase in the amount of extinctions that are happening on this planet. You take out that every 60 to 65 million year mass extinction that we see, and you'll see that the extinction rate right now is at an all-time high. And the reason that that's happening is because of humans putting an excessive amount of pressure on other species by taking away their habitat, poisoning their water, poisoning their air, reducing their food supply or the resources that are available to them. And as a result, we end up subtracting or reducing the amount of resources that are available to us. Another thing that was being discussed and being asked about, I think Thomas asked a question about convergent and divergent evolution. So the idea of convergent evolution, I mean, this is very, very, very misleading, and I want to make sure that we clarify this. That's like taking species A and species B, and if we were going to map them on a cladogram, we would say that they are doing this. Okay? And that's kind of what the book shows, but this is really actually a terrible representation of what's happening with species A and species B. Species A and species B are not becoming more closely related to each other. They might look more like each other, they might act more like each other, they might both fill the same niche in an ecosystem, their body types might be very similar to each other, they might eat the same food. But from a genetic standpoint, they aren't necessarily getting closer together. You know, a good example of this is if we look at the shark and the dolphin. The shark and the dolphin are not becoming more similar to each other. Their environment is very similar, and their niche that they fill within that environment is very similar, and as a result, their body type is very similar. The method in which they swim and how they catch their prey and all those things are very similar. Mouth shape, eye location, and you know, we could keep going on and on and on. And if you looked at those and you knew nothing about them, you go, oh yeah, those two species, they are so very similar. Similarly, they must be very related to each other. But the fact of the matter, I mean, you guys know, a shark is a fish, a dolphin is a mammal. They're not closely related at all. And Thomas's question is, given the right conditions, could you get these animals, these species, to actually converge into one species so that they could reproduce with each other and form viable offspring? And the answer is no. I mean, it's a resounding no. There's no way that could happen. You know, we could do some sort of mathematical or statistical analysis of the likelihood of all these nucleotides and the mutations that are available and the selective pressures being applied, and and the number that we're going to get is this infinitely small number that is going to give us the answer of no. So no, that's not something that can possibly happen. Another thing that I wanted to talk about here is the fact that we had a lot of confusion about the idea of intermediate factors not being applied or not being given an advantage or given a disadvantage, I should say, to a population. You know, the idea that we could, in disruptive selection, is that we could have possibly, if this is a chart that's charting the population, we could see some kind of strange data that shows population. And then over here we see the number of, there's a species. And we see that the population increases. And as we look at this characteristic, let's say that, I think the book used, shell thickness of some sort of mollusk. And if we look at shell thickness, and this is showing that the intermediate thickness or the medium thickness is actually a disadvantage, that we have a small population that exists here, but we have a very high population here and a high population here that exists for, thin versus thick shells. And so, the way that I look at this is, a possible reason that this could be is in many cases what we do is we have a characteristic that will be an advantage if you are on the extreme end of whatever that is. In this case it's shell thickness, but we could pick anything. If you were talking about a bird, for example, let's say that you were a bird on and these birds that have really short beaks have an advantage, let's say because they're more precise when they're hunting, so they're able to catch little little ants. And let's do a little bird here. This is my bird. That's his wing. Okay, and he's very precise because he's got a short beak, and he can catch more insects than the bird with a medium-sized beak. But the bird with the long beak has a different kind of advantage, and the kind of advantage that he has is that he is able to, let's say, get insects or pull insects out of a tree. And that's a huge evolutionary advantage. And here's my tree stump. And that's a huge evolutionary advantage to be able to pull insects out of the tree. So the ones that are in the middle here are, we're going to draw an X through there. The ones that have the medium-sized beak, they end up dying because they're being outcompeted for the insects that crawl on the ground, and they're being outcompeted for the insects that live in the trees. And so this intermediate characteristic is actually a disadvantage. And this is just one example. I mean, you could think of hundreds and hundreds of examples. We could pick any animal like that. And that'll kind of explain why this whole intermediate characteristic is not always, or is sometimes a disadvantage. Let's see here. I want to talk about just one more thing, and that's the evidence for selection. We see natural selection that's happening all around us all the time. We artificially select things, certain characteristics in certain organisms. We're starting to do that with our children now, but we've seen that with dogs and with racehorses and things that are bred for certain characteristics, and leads to some sort of evidence that natural selection can occur. We're forcing it, speeding it up by doing it artificially, but we can see this happen in nature. Another good example would be antibiotic resistant bacteria. We are constantly exposing bacteria to antibiotics, and when we expose this bacteria over and over and over and over and over again to the antibiotics, obviously some of them become resistant, and then we start to have some problems with some antibiotic resistant strains of bacteria. Bacteria is extremely effective at morphing itself and changing itself because its reproductive rate is so incredibly short. And that many generations can happen in a very short period of time. So that's what makes bacteria so effective at changing and morphing and adapting to its environment.